The poor woman made an effort to meet it, and swallowed a mouthful eagerly, and then, relieved probably by the change of posture and refreshed by the cool liquid, she stretched out the hand in which she still held Mary's half-crown and said, "Go, Betsy, buy." The child she addressed eagerly seized the money in the hand that had fingers to close upon it, and flitted through the door in an instant. The poor woman had again closed her eyes, but her breathing was more tranquil, and Mary hoped that she had fallen asleep. With this persuasion she stood perfectly still and silent beside her, her own hand locked, though she was not conscious of it, in the grasp of her deeply affected nurse, while her whole soul seemed settled in her eyes as she fixed them immovably upon what she felt now the most awful spectacle that a mortal can gaze upon, namely, the passing of a human spirit from life to death. The little girl, whose swollen and discolored arm still remained uncovered, probably because she feared the pain likely to attend replacing it in the sleeve, stood close beside her mother's head, childishly contemplating the cushions which supported it, and apparently as unconscious as they were of the heavy loss that threatened her. But this stillness did not remain uninterrupted. All the members of the family, who had been named as belonging to the factory, except the father, returned for the purpose of taking such rest and refreshment as 1 hour, nearly half of which was consumed by the walk to and from the mill, could permit. The latch was lifted by the eldest girl, a delicately featured, but dreadfully dirty creature about 17, with a sort of sharp eagerness, denoting the curiosity excited by the sight of the carriage stationed before their dwelling. On perceiving the death-like countenance of her mother, made distinctly visible by the noonday light that streamed through the open door, she suddenly stopped, clasping her hands together, and uttered in tones that sounded like a shriek, "Oh God, she is dead!" "No, not dead," said Mary solemnly, and without turning her eyes from the object on which they were riveted. "Not dead. She is sleeping. Hush! Do not disturb her." Following on the heels of the first came the second girl, about a year her junior, but with a countenance much less prepossessing. Dirty was she too, if possible more so than the others, and there was a look of stolid stupidity about her that, but for the sort of reckless audacity which lurked in her eyes, might have given the idea of an almost brutal want of animation. A thin, consumptive-looking lad of 14 followed after her, and closed the door behind him as he entered. "Oh, mother!" he exclaimed as her sunken face caught his eyes. "I wish I was alongside of ye, and then we'd be buried together." And without appearing conscious of the presence of the strangers, he suddenly threw himself upon the tottering bedstead, and nestling his face close to that of the dying woman, kissed her passionately again and again. "My boy, you may hasten her by going by that," said Miss Tremlett gently. Be still, all of ye." But as she spoke, she, and Mary too, whose hand she continued to hold, made way for the eldest girl, who now eagerly but silently pressing forward, dropped on her knees beside the bed, and throwing her 2 arms over the emaciated body, remained with streaming eyes that rested piteously on the face of her mother. The second girl looked on, till by degrees her heavy countenance appeared to stiffen into horror, and she too drew near, but with distended and tearless eyes that seemed to speak more of fear than love. Miss Tremlett looked anxiously into the face of her charge. It was deathly pale, and wore an expression of solemnity so new and strange that the good woman threw her arms around her in an agony of fond anxiety, exclaiming, "My Mary, my dear child, come away! Mary, Mary, come away! You can do no good. This scene is not fit for you to witness." "You mistake, nurse. It is fit for me. It is necessary for me. Do not disturb me, Nurse Tremlett. Do not." Then, after a short pause, during which her eyes were closed and her hand crossed upon her breast, she again whispered, Could she not pray with me? Shall I not ask her to pray with me?" "My sweet girl, she will not hear you, I think," said the old woman, but while tears streamed down her cheeks. "But you shall be satisfied, my darling." And approaching the bed and leaning over the girl who knelt beside it, Miss Tremlett, but in a low but distinct voice, pronounced the words, "Shall we pray with you?" She was evidently heard and understood, for the hands that for some minutes had lain motionless were with an effort brought together and clasped in the attitude of prayer. Mary, who was eagerly watching her every movement, suddenly stepped forward, and gliding in between the eldest and the youngest girl, dropped on her knees beside them. Miss Tremlett followed close behind, knelt also, and then with trembling lips and faltering voice, but slowly, distinctly, and most reverentially, Mary Brotherton uttered the last and most impressive of those sentences in our litany, which is followed by the solemn petition for deliverance. It was with a throb of pleasure at her heart and an exclamation of thanksgiving from her tongue that she heard the dying woman answer, "Amen." Almost at the very instant she did so, the latch was again lifted, and Mr. Thomas, one of the three medical practitioners of Ashley, entered. Miss Brotherton was not conscious of ever having seen him before, but he, like everyone else in the neighborhood, perfectly well knew the heiress by sight, and now, even now, in the awful chamber of death, bowed low before her. It would not be easy to describe the feeling which she turned away from this ill-timed demonstration of respect. Yet it was with no harshness, for the struggle so often going on within us between our betters and our worser natures was at this moment so decidedly in favor of all that was good in her young heart, that there was hardly a place for any severer feeling than pity within it. She had risen from her knees as he made his bow, and turning gravely towards him, said, "If anything can be done, sir, for this poor woman, let it not be delayed. I fear she is very ill." "Certainly, ma'am, certainly, Miss Brotherton, my best intentions may be depended on, but will you first, my dear young lady, give me leave to observe that I would much rather see you in your carriage than here. I cannot answer for it. It is a point of fact impossible to say whether there may not be something deleterious, something noxious, in short, to your very precious health in the atmosphere of this room." "I thank you, sir. Be sure that I will take quite sufficient care of myself, but it is not for me that your services are wanted. It is here." Sophie, the eldest girl, seemed unconscious of what was going on, for she remained perfectly motionless on the spot where she had first knelt down, while the third sister, who had been sent on the poor mother's last errand for bread, and who had crept back unobserved into the room during the foregoing scene, occupied the space on her right hand, Mary Brotherton having knelt on her left, so that there was scarcely space for the approach of the smart apothecary. "Move, my dear girls," said Mary, gently laying a hand on the shoulder of each. They both rose, while Mr. Thomas, carefully storing the anecdote in aid of the gossiping part of his practice, looked and listened with astonishment to what seemed to him the very unnatural conduct of the rich young lady, and internally exclaimed, "A clear case of religious mania this, as I ever saw it. She won't live long, probably. What a match!" It required no very long examination of the poor patient to discover that her last moments were rapidly approaching. "Upon my word, Miss Brotherton, I really wish I could persuade you to come away," persisted the medical gentleman as he once more turned towards her. "The air is becoming more metaphysic in every instance. This woman is in the last extremity." "Nothing, then, can be done for her?" said Mary. "No, ma'am, nothing in the world. Not the whole college, if they were present, could keep soul and body together for another hour, I should venture to say." On this, Miss Brotherton put a fee into his hand, and bent her head in token that his business there was ended, and that he might depart. But he did not immediately obey the hint, for pocketing the unwanted golden prize, he seemed anxious to remain a little longer where such blessings abounded, and, returning to the bed, again took hold of the poor woman's hand, and then said, in a voice of authority, "Let me have some water." It was Mary only who seemed to understand his words, and she immediately obeyed them, placing in his hand the broken mug which he had set aside upon the floor. The apothecary put the water to the lips of the poor woman, and she again swallowed a little of it, after which they saw her lips move as she was making an effort to speak. Miss Tremlett leant over her, and then with a stronger effort she articulated, "Let me see William." "Who is William?" said Miss Tremlett, raising herself. "Is it one of the children?" It be father," said Betsy. "Where is he to be found?" cried Miss Brotherton eagerly. "Let him be sought for instantly. Where is he likely to be?" "At the gin shop," replied the ungracious Grace. "If you know where he is, go for him," Mary said impressively, "and for God's sake, let him not delay." The girl she addressed stared at her as upon something utterly incomprehensible, but she obeyed, and in so short a time as to show that the gin shop was no great distance, returned with a man of an exterior as filthy as the rest of his race, wretchedly crippled in the legs, and a complexion that spoke of ill health and intemperance. "What? Is it come to that? Is it already?" said the man, looking wistfully from the bottom of the bed, but with a countenance whose lines seemed too fixed in the expression of hard indifference to permit its exhibiting much feeling. "She asked for you, father," said Sophie gently. Then, taking one of her mother's hands in hers, she murmured, "Mother, dear mother, open your eyes upon us. Father is here, and all of us," while large teardrops fell upon the livid face as she hung over it. The dying eyes were opened once more, and consciousness and recognition, all of them, were visible as she suffered them to rest first on one and then another. The boy only, from his position, she could not see, but even then there seemed intelligence between them, and she certainly knew he was lying beside her, for her head rested against his, and she raised her left hand till her fingers touched his cheek. The youngest child also, when the eyes opened, was too much behind her, but she seemed aware of her vicinity, and pronounced the words "little one," probably her usual appellation, so distinctly as to make the child start, and instantly climb upon the bed to kiss her. The last movement was an effort to return this kiss, and the next moment Miss Tremlett removed the child's clinging lips from a corpse. A very awful interval of perfect stillness followed. "Can I be of any further service to you, Miss Brotherington?" from the lips of Mr. Thomas were the first words that broke it. Poor Mary only shook her head, but Miss Tremlett replied, "No, thank you, sir, nothing more," with repeated bows and rather reluctant step, he departed, turning, however, to give another glance at the heiress as he passed out, for he was not without hopes that she might fall down in a fainting fit. Nothing, however, of the kind happened, and he disappeared. "You will go now, Mary dear?" whispered Miss Tremlett, "and I will come here tomorrow to inquire about them for you." "Yes, I will go now," replied the young lady. "I cannot comfort them." Then, looking round the steadfast group, as if to discover which of them appeared in the fittest state to be spoken to, she fixed upon the little Betsy, and placing a couple of sovereigns in her hand, told her to take care of them, and give them to her father presently, adding, "Tell your sister Sophie to come up to my house. This," giving a card, "is the place where I live."